As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm glow over the quiet streets of Austin, Sarah Miller, a former state attorney general, found herself driving home after a long evening at a charity event. She was relieved to step away from the demanding political sphere, if only for a moment. Clad in a comfortable outfit, her hair tied back in a neat bun, Sarah felt a sense of freedom as she cruised along Highway 18-3 in her silver SUV. However, the tranquility of the evening shattered when she noticed flashing red and blue lights in her rearview mirror. Her heart raced as she instinctively tightened her grip on the steering wheel. She hadn't broken any traffic laws. There was no reason for this stop. Yet past experiences with law enforcement flooded her mind, where she had witnessed unlawful stops and abuse of power. Sarah carefully signaled and pulled over, anxiety creeping in as the patrol car approached her vehicle. The officer, a stocky man with a commanding presence, stepped out of his car, exuding an air of dominance. His boots thudded heavily against the pavement as he approached, and Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. His name tag read Officer James Collins, a name she had never heard before, but she quickly recognized his type, an officer who thrived on intimidation. "License and registration," he barked, his tone harsh and without courtesy. Sarah turned to him, her voice steady as she replied, "Was I speeding, officer?" He didn't respond immediately, instead snatching her documents with a dismissive gesture and pretending to examine them while scrutinizing her from head to toe. The air between them was thick with tension. She could sense the power play unfolding. In the distance, a few passers-by slowed their pace, glancing curiously at the scene, but most continued on their way, oblivious to the confrontation. Sarah knew she had to tread carefully. As Officer Collins leaned closer, the weight of the moment pressed heavily upon her. She felt it was more than just a traffic violation. It was a test of her resolve. "Step out of the car," he commanded, his voice low and menacing. Sarah's instincts screamed at her to comply, but her determination flared within her. She could feel the eyes of the world watching, and she refused to be another victim of abuse. Taking a deep breath, she unbuckled her seatbelt and stepped out, her heart pounding in her chest. As she stood on the asphalt, the night air felt charged with the potential for conflict. Officer Collins took a step back, his gaze assessing her as if gauging how far he could push this situation. "Turn around, hands on the car," he instructed, his tone dripping with authority. Sarah hesitated, her mind racing. "Why?" she asked, maintaining her composure. The officer's expression hardened, and for a fleeting moment she saw a flicker of annoyance cross his face. "Are you resisting?" he shot back, his voice sharp. Sarah stood her ground, determined not to yield to intimidation. The silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken rules of power and authority. In the background, a couple walking their dog stopped to observe the standoff, their expressions a mix of disbelief and concern. Sarah felt the weight of their gaze, and it steeled her resolve. She was prepared to fight for her rights, no matter the cost. "Officer, I need you to understand something," she said, her voice firm yet calm. "I know exactly what I'm allowed to do, and I know exactly what you can't do." The officer's eyes narrowed, and for the first time, his confidence seemed to waver. This was just the beginning of a confrontation that would challenge the very fabric of authority and justice, and Sarah was ready to stand her ground. Stay tuned for the next part of Sarah's story. Don't forget to share your thoughts in the comments below and look out for our upcoming videos on flourishing tales. As Sarah stood outside her SUV, the tension in the air was palpable. Officer Collins regarded her with a mix of disbelief and irritation, clearly unaccustomed to being challenged. The night was still, save for the distant sounds of traffic and the rustling leaves, which only emphasized the gravity of the moment. Sarah's heart raced, not from fear, but from a fierce determination to assert her rights. "Step out of the car," he repeated, his jaw set, as if expecting her compliance without question. Sarah took a deep breath, recalling the countless cases she had argued in court, cases that revolved around unlawful stops, racial profiling, and the abuse of power by officers like Collins. She refused to let herself be bullied into submission. "Why should I?" she replied, her voice steady but firm. You haven't given me a valid reason to leave my vehicle." The officer's eyes narrowed, and there was a flicker of annoyance on his face. He was not used to being questioned, especially not by someone he perceived as a civilian without influence. "Are you arguing with me?" he shot back, a smirk creeping onto his lips as if he found amusement in her defiance. Sarah felt a rush of anger at his condescension, but she maintained her composure. "I'm not arguing, I'm simply asking for clarification," she said, keeping her tone even. In her mind, she knew this was more than just a traffic stop. It was a battle of wills, a chance to expose the pervasive mindset that allowed officers like Collins to abuse their authority. The few bystanders who had paused to observe the confrontation exchanged glances, their expressions a mix of curiosity and concern. Some appeared sympathetic, while others seemed uncertain about getting involved. Sarah noticed a young couple nearby, their dog tugging at its leash, eager to move on, but they lingered, perhaps hoping for a resolution or simply unwilling to turn away from the unfolding drama. "Your taillight is out," Collins finally declared, his tone dismissive, as though he had just delivered an undeniable fact. Sarah frowned, a sense of disbelief washing over her. She had checked her lights before leaving, and she knew there was nothing wrong with her vehicle. "That's not true," she countered, her voice steady. "I had my car serviced just last week, and everything was in perfect condition." Collins stepped closer, invading her personal space. The heat of his presence felt oppressive, but Sarah refused to back down. "Step out of the car now, or I will have to escalate this situation," he threatened, his voice low and menacing. The underlying tone of unspoken authority was clear. He wanted to intimidate her into compliance. In that moment, Sarah realized the stakes were higher than she had anticipated. This was not merely a matter of a faulty taillight. This was about power dynamics, control, and the willingness to stand up against injustice. She glanced at the road ahead, devoid of witnesses and cameras, and felt a surge of defiance. She wouldn't allow herself to become another statistic, a victim of an officer's unchecked aggression. With a deliberate motion, she unbuckled her seatbelt and opened the door. Stepping onto the pavement, the cool night air brushed against her skin, invigorating her resolve. "I'm stepping out," she stated, her voice unwavering. "But I will not be treated like a criminal." She turned to face Collins, who had taken a step back, momentarily taken aback by her boldness. "Turn around and place your hands on the car," he ordered, his demeanor shifting to one of irritation. "For what reason?" she asked, her heart pounding but her mind clear. The couple nearby had stopped to witness the confrontation unfold, their expressions revealing their concern. They exchanged worried glances, unsure of what they should do. "Are you resisting arrest?" Collins pressed, his voice sharp, attempting to regain the upper hand. "I'm asking a question," Sarah replied, her determination unyielding. She could sense the shift in the atmosphere. The tension was thick, and the stakes were rising. Collins's annoyance morphed into anger as he reached for his radio. "We've got a non-compliant driver here," he muttered, his tone clipped. Sarah's pulse quickened, but she stood firm. "You need to understand that I know my rights," she asserted, locking eyes with him. "This isn't how it's supposed to work." The couple, now visibly concerned, began to inch closer, their dog momentarily forgotten as they watched the interaction unfold. They could feel the heaviness in the air, the palpable anxiety that came from witnessing an encounter between a civilian and law enforcement. The man whispered to his partner, his brow furrowed with worry, while she nodded, concerned for Sarah's safety. In a sudden move, Collins lunged forward, gripping Sarah's wrist tightly. "You're under arrest," he declared, the weight of his words hanging in the air. Sarah felt a rush of adrenaline surge through her. "For what?" she demanded, refusing to let fear take hold. "You're obstructing an officer," he replied, pulling out handcuffs. As he yanked her arms behind her back, Sarah felt the metal cuffs bite into her skin. "You don't know who you're messing with," she murmured through gritted teeth, her resolve crystallizing. Collins laughed dismissively, pushing her toward the patrol car, his swagger evident. "Lady, I don't care who you are," he retorted, but Sarah could see the flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. This confrontation was just the beginning, and Sarah was determined to fight back against the injustice unfolding before her. She would not be silenced, and she would not let this officer's arrogance define her. The battle for her rights had begun, and she was ready to take a stand. Stay tuned for the next part of Sarah's story. We invite you to share your thoughts in the comments below, and look forward to more compelling stories on Flourishing Tales. As Sarah was shoved toward the patrol car, the cold metal of the handcuffs felt constricting around her wrists. Despite the discomfort, she maintained her composure, reminding herself of the stakes at play. Officer Collins, with a smug expression on his face, opened the door and pushed her into the back seat of the cruiser. The hard plastic seat pressed against her as the door slammed shut behind her, sealing her in a world of confusion and anger. She took a moment to breathe, feeling the adrenaline coursing through her veins. The lights of the patrol car flashed rhythmically, casting vibrant hues across the pavement and illuminating the faces of onlookers who had gathered nearby. Some watched with expressions of shock, while others whispered among themselves, unsure of what do. A handful of concerned citizens had begun to approach, their curiosity piqued by the unfolding drama. "Most people just keep their mouths shut when I tell them to step out," Collins remarked, his voice dripping with arrogance as he settled into the driver's seat. Sarah shot him a defiant glare through the partition. "And most officers don't arrest people for questioning a traffic stop," she shot back, her tone unwavering. It was clear that he expected compliance, but she was not one to back down easily. "I bet you think you're special," Collins sneered, his fingers tapping rhythmically on the steering wheel. "What makes you so different?" Sarah remained silent, choosing not to engage further. She could feel the tension in the air, thick and charged. As they sat in the patrol car, she could hear the faint murmurs of the crowd outside, a mix of concerned voices and whispers of disbelief. The couple who had watched the initial confrontation exchanged glances, clearly worried about her safety. The woman, a petite figure with dark hair, glanced at her partner, who nodded, a determined look on his face. They seemed ready to step in, to advocate for Sarah, but the fear of overstepping their bounds held them back. The scene felt surreal, as if time had slowed down, and the world outside blurred into a backdrop of uncertainty. Collins radioed in her arrest, his tone casual as he relayed the situation, but there was an edge to his voice that suggested he relished this moment of power. "We've got a non-compliant driver here," he reported, the smugness evident in his words. Sarah felt her heart race again, knowing that she was being painted as the villain in this scenario. The injustice of it all ignited a fire within her. She was determined to fight back, no matter the cost. After what felt like an eternity, Collins parked the patrol car in front of the police station. The overhead lights continued to flash, illuminating the darkened parking lot. Sarah's pulse quickened as she realized this was only the beginning of a long night. Collins turned to her, his expression a mix of satisfaction and irritation. "You're going to regret this," he warned, but she simply met his gaze with unwavering resolve. As he opened the door and gestured for her to step out, Sarah took a moment to collect herself. She could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on her, but she wouldn't let it crush her spirit. The couple from earlier had followed them into the parking lot, their eyes wide with concern as they watched the unfolding scene. They exchanged worried glances with one another, clearly contemplating whether they should intervene. "Let's go," Collins ordered, pulling her roughly from the car. Sarah's wrists ached from the tightness of the cuffs, but she refused to show any sign of weakness. She held her head high as they walked into the station, the fluorescent lights flickering overhead. The smell of stale coffee and disinfectant filled the air, a reminder of the bureaucratic indifference that permeated the building. Inside, the booking area buzzed with the low hum of conversation and the occasional clatter of paperwork. Officers behind the desk barely glanced up as Collins led her through the process of fingerprinting and taking her mugshot. The indifference of the officers around her was striking. It was as if they were merely going through the motions, desensitized to the lives they affected. "Enjoy your stay," Collins sneered as he shoved her toward a holding cell, the metal bars clanging shut behind her. Sarah leaned against the cold wall, her heart racing but her mind focused. She had been in tighter situations before, and she knew she had to stay strong. This was not just about her. It was about shining a light on the systemic issues that allowed officers like Collins to operate unchecked. As she sat on the bench in the cell, she could hear the faint sounds of officers chatting at the front desk. The mundane shuffle of paperwork contrasting sharply with the turmoil brewing inside her. She closed her eyes for a moment, trying to steady her breathing. The realization of what was happening began to settle in. This was more than just a personal fight. It was a battle against a culture of abuse and silence. Heavy footsteps approached, and Sarah opened her eyes to see Collins standing before her once again. Arms crossed and a smirk plastered on his face. "Comfy?" he taunted, leaning closer to the bars. But Sarah was unshaken. "I'm exactly where I need to be," she replied, a small smile curling at the corners of her lips. For the first time she saw a flicker of uncertainty in his expression, a crack in his facade of power. As the tension hung in the air, Sarah recognized the moment as a turning point. She was not just a victim, she was a survivor, ready to expose the injustice that had led her to this point. The fight was far from over, and she was prepared to take on whatever came next. Stay tuned for the next part of Sarah's story. We encourage you to share your thoughts in the comments below, and look forward to more compelling narratives on flourishing tales. As Sarah sat in the holding cell, the cold metal bench beneath her felt like a reminder of the harsh reality she was facing. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting a stark glow that made the sterile environment feel even more oppressive. She could hear the muffled sounds of officers chatting at the front desk, their casual banter contrasting sharply with the tension that coiled tightly within her. This wasn't just a matter of being detained, it was a reflection of the power dynamics that existed within the system. The minutes felt like hours. As she waited, her mind racing with thoughts of how quickly everything had escalated. She was a former state attorney general, accustomed to navigating the complexities of the law, yet here she was, trapped in a cell, and at the mercy of a man who thrived on intimidation. The weight of the situation pressed down on her, but she refused to let despair take root. Instead, she focused on maintaining her composure and strategizing her next moves. Just then, she heard heavy footsteps approaching. Sarah's heart raced as Collins appeared at the front of her cell, his expression a mix of irritation and arrogance. He leaned against the bars, arms crossed, a smirk still plastered on his face. "You think you're smart, huh?" he sneered, his voice dripping with condescension. Sarah met his gaze with unwavering confidence, refusing to let his words affect her. "I'm not here to play games," she replied, her tone steady. Collins stepped closer, his posture shifting as he attempted to assert his dominance. "If you just played along, you wouldn't be in here right now," he taunted, leaning in slightly. But Sarah remained unfazed, her resolve strengthening in the face of his aggression. "I would rather be in here than be silenced," she declared, the fire in her voice evident. For a moment she could see a flicker of annoyance cross his face, a brief crack in his facade that made her feel a surge of empowerment. She could hear the distant murmur of conversations outside the cell, officers discussing mundane matters while her fate hung in the balance. The apathy of the environment around her was suffocating, and it fueled her determination to expose the injustice that had led her here. She knew her rights, and she was not about to let Collins manipulate her. Suddenly, the sound of another officer's footsteps echoed in the corridor, interrupting their standoff. A younger officer, perhaps in his late 20s, approached hesitantly, clipboard in hand. He looked slightly nervous as he cleared his throat, glancing between Sarah and Collins. Sergeant Collins," he began, his voice tentative. "We got a call." Collins straightened, his demeanor shifting from arrogance to irritation. "What do you mean?" he snapped, his voice sharp, clearly annoyed at the interruption. The younger officer swallowed hard, his gaze darting to Sarah before returning to Collins. "I think you need to see this," he said, his tone carrying a weight of seriousness that made Collins bristle. Sarah leaned forward, her curiosity piqued. She could feel the tension in the air as Collins's expression darkened. He stepped back, muttering under his breath as he followed the younger officer down the hallway. For a brief moment Sarah was left alone in her cell, the silence amplifying her thoughts. She knew that the power dynamics were shifting, and she could sense that Collins was beginning to realize the consequences of his actions. Minutes passed, and the atmosphere grew increasingly charged. Sarah felt a mix of anxiety and anticipation as she waited for Collins to return. She was aware that the stakes were high, not just for herself, but for others who had been silenced by the system. This was a moment of reckoning, one that could potentially expose the corrupt practices that had allowed officers like Collins to operate without accountability. When Collins finally returned, he was not alone. An older officer accompanied him, exuding an air of authority that even Collins could not ignore. The younger officer trailed behind, looking apprehensive. Collins's expression had changed. The smug confidence he had displayed earlier was replaced by a tense unease. "Collins, step into my office now," the older officer commanded, his voice firm and assertive. For the first time, Collins hesitated, glancing back at Sarah, as if weighing his options. The power had shifted dramatically, and Sarah could see the realization dawning on him. He was no longer in control of the situation. As they disappeared into the office, Sarah took a deep breath, feeling a rush of hope. This was her chance to expose the truth, not just for herself, but for all those who had faced similar injustices. She could sense that the wheels of change were beginning to turn, and she was ready to be part of that transformation. After what felt like an eternity, Collins returned. His demeanor noticeably changed. He approached her cell, his jaw clenched and his expression tight. "You're free to go," he muttered, the words escaping his lips begrudgingly. The clang of the keys echoed as he unlocked the cell door, and Sarah stepped out, her heart pounding with a mix of relief and triumph. As she walked past him, she couldn't resist a final remark. "You should think twice before messing with someone who knows the law," she said, her voice steady. Collins's face flushed with anger, but Sarah didn't care. She had stood her ground, and she had made her point. The experience had ignited a fire within her, one that would not be easily extinguished. She was determined to fight for justice, not just for herself, but for all those who had been silenced. This was just the beginning, and Sarah was ready to take on whatever came next. Stay tuned for the next part of Sarah's story. We encourage you to share your thoughts in the comments below and look forward to more compelling narratives on Flourishing Tales. As Sarah stepped out of the holding cell, she could feel the weight of the past hours pressing down on her. The fluorescent lights of the police station flickered overhead, but she refused to let their harsh glow diminish her resolve. She had faced adversity before, but this moment was different. It was a turning point, not only for her but for many others who had suffered in silence at the hands of those in power. The tension in the air was palpable as Collins unlocked the cell door, his demeanor noticeably altered. Gone was the bravado he had displayed earlier. Now there was a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. "You're free to go," he muttered, his voice tight with resentment. Sarah stepped out, feeling a surge of triumph. She was determined not to let this moment go unnoticed. As she walked past him, she couldn't resist the urge to assert herself. "Next time, think twice before you underestimate someone who knows their rights," she said, her voice steady and confident. Collins's expression hardened, but she could sense that he was rattled. It was a small victory, but it was hers. The atmosphere shifted as Sarah made her way toward the exit. The couple who had witnessed the confrontation earlier waited near the door, their expressions a mix of relief and admiration. The woman approached her, concern etched on her face. "Are you okay?" she asked softly. Sarah nodded, feeling a warm surge of gratitude for their support. "I will be," she replied, her voice stronger than she felt. Once outside, the cool night air washed over her, a welcome contrast to the stifling environment of the station. She took a deep breath, inhaling the fresh scent of the nearby trees and the faint sounds of the city at night. It felt liberating to be free again, but she knew that her battle was far from over. The struggle against injustice was just beginning, and she was prepared to fight for those who couldn't. As she climbed into her waiting car, her lawyer David Whitmore greeted her with a concerned expression. "Sarah, what happened in there?" he asked, his tone urgent. She could see the worry etched on his face, and it fueled her determination. "Collins tried to intimidate me, but I stood my ground," she replied, her voice firm. "I won't let him or anyone else silence me." David nodded, his expression shifting to one of admiration. "Good. This isn't just about you. It's about the systemic issues that allow officers like him to operate without accountability." Sarah felt a fire ignite within her as she considered the implications of her experience. This was about more than just one encounter. It was a chance to shed light on a broken system. As they drove away from the station, Sarah's phone buzzed with notifications. She glanced at the screen and saw news alerts flooding in. Reports of her wrongful detention were spreading quickly. The media was picking up the story, and she felt a mixture of anxiety and excitement. This was her opportunity to bring attention to the issues she had fought against throughout her career. "Looks like the news is already out," David remarked, glancing at her phone. "You have a chance to make a real impact here." Sarah nodded, her mind racing with possibilities. She knew that her experience could resonate with others who had faced similar injustices. "It's time to hold them accountable," she declared, her voice resolute. The following morning brought a deluge of headlines. Former Attorney General wrongfully detained. Officer under investigation. News anchors dissected the footage. Legal analysts debated the implications. And the public erupted in outrage. Sarah watched from her apartment, sipping coffee as the media frenzy unfolded. It was surreal to see her story become a focal point for discussion, but she felt a sense of purpose in being part of this dialogue. Calls flooded in from reporters, colleagues, and even old political allies who wanted to support her. Each conversation fueled her determination to push for change. But one call stood out among the rest. It was the governor. "Sarah," he began, his tone serious, "I assume you've seen the news." "Sarah, it's hard to miss," she replied, leaning back against her couch. There was a brief pause before the governor continued. "The Department of Justice is taking an interest in this case. They may want to speak with you." Sarah felt a mix of apprehension and resolve. "I'm not looking to be a headline," she stated, her voice steady. "You already are," he replied, and she could sense the weight of his words. This was not just about her. It was about a larger systemic issue that needed to be addressed. As she hung up, Sarah reflected on the path ahead. She knew this journey would not be easy, but she was ready to face the challenges that lay before her. The fight for justice was not just personal. It was a collective struggle for those who had been silenced, and she was determined to be their voice. With her resolve strengthened, Sarah prepared to take the next steps in her fight. She would not allow fear or intimidation to dictate her actions. The system had failed too many people for too long, and it was time for change. Stay tuned for the next part of Sarah's story. We encourage you to share your thoughts in the comments below, and look forward to more compelling narratives on Flourishing Tales. The following morning, Sarah awoke to the sound of her phone buzzing incessantly on the nightstand. The sunlight poured through her window, illuminating the room and casting a warm glow that contrasted with the storm of thoughts in her mind. As she reached for her phone, she was greeted by a barrage of notifications, news alerts, messages from friends, and calls from reporters eager to discuss her recent ordeal. The media frenzy surrounding her wrongful detention had reached a fever pitch, and she could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her. Sarah scrolled through the headlines, her heart racing as she read phrases like "former Attorney General wrongfully detained" and "officer under investigation." The news had spread like wildfire, igniting conversations about police accountability and the abuse of power. It felt surreal to see her story plastered across various platforms, but she knew this was an opportunity to advocate for change. As she sipped her coffee, Sarah's phone rang again, this time displaying the governor's name. Taking a deep breath, she answered. "Good morning, Governor." "Sarah, I hope you're doing okay," he began, his tone sincere. "I just wanted to check in after everything that's happened." "I'm managing," she replied, her voice steady. "But I know this situation goes beyond me." The governor paused before speaking again. "I couldn't agree more. The Department of Justice is closely monitoring this case, and they may reach out to you for a statement." This could lead to significant reforms. Sarah felt a sense of urgency swell within her. "I'm ready to do whatever it takes to ensure that justice is served," she affirmed. "This isn't just about my experience. It's about countless others who have faced similar injustices. Just remember to take care of yourself, too," the governor advised gently before ending the call. After hanging up, Sarah felt a mixture of determination and anxiety. She knew the path ahead would be filled with challenges, but she was resolved to use her voice to advocate for change. She had spent her career fighting for justice, and now it was time to channel that energy into something meaningful. As the day progressed, she received more calls from reporters requesting interviews. Sarah decided to speak out publicly, sharing her story and urging others to come forward with their experiences. She wanted to shed light on the systemic issues that allowed officers like Collins to operate without accountability. This was her chance to make a real difference. In the days that followed, Sarah found herself at the center of a growing movement for police reform. Community members began to rally around her, sharing their stories of encounters with law enforcement that had left them feeling powerless. Social media campaigns emerged, calling for accountability and transparency in policing practices. Sarah felt empowered by the support of her community, knowing that she was not alone in this fight. As the media coverage continued, it became clear that Collins was facing serious repercussions for his actions. Internal Affairs launched an investigation into his conduct, uncovering a troubling pattern of excessive force complaints and racial profiling. The news brought a sense of vindication for Sarah. She knew that her experiences were contributing to a larger conversation about justice and accountability. One evening, as Sarah prepared for another round of interviews, she received a call from David, her lawyer. "Sarah, I just got off the phone with Internal Affairs," he said, his voice tinged with excitement. "They're taking this seriously, and there's a chance that Collins could face disciplinary action." A rush of relief washed over her. "That's great news, David. This is exactly what we need to see happen. Also, I think it's important for you to meet with a few key organizations that focus on police reform. They're looking for advocates to help shape new policies moving forward," David suggested. Sarah nodded, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. "I would love that. The more we can do to push for change, the better." As the weeks went by, Sarah became more involved in advocacy, speaking at community events and participating in panels focused on police reform. She shared her story openly, highlighting the importance of accountability and the need for systemic change within law enforcement. The conversations she had sparked were powerful and necessary, and she felt honored to be part of a movement that aimed to uplift voices that had long been silenced. One day, as she stood before a crowd of supporters at a rally, Sarah felt a sense of empowerment wash over her. "Together we can create a system that holds officers accountable for their actions," she declared, her voice resonating with passion. "No one should have to endure what I went through. We must fight for justice, not just for ourselves but for everyone who has been affected by the abuses of power." The crowd erupted in applause, and Sarah felt a surge of hope. She realized that her experience had become a catalyst for change, igniting a fire within her community and beyond. The fight was far from over, but she was ready to continue advocating for justice, ensuring that the system would be held accountable for its actions. As Sarah looked out at the faces of those gathered, she knew that this was just the beginning. Together they would weave a new narrative, one of empowerment, accountability, and justice for all. Stay tuned for the next part of Sarah's journey. We encourage you to share your thoughts in the comments below, and look forward to more compelling narratives on Flourishing Tales.